Hello, I am back, and today I will be drawing a D&D character based on the roll of the dice.
Let's bring out the Tower of Destiny!
I feel like Elf Wizard is just quintessential D&D. Like, I almost don't need to explain what it is to be an Elf Wizard. It's, they're both classic. It's a classic character race combo. But let's delve into it anyway, shall we? So elves are officially described as magical people of otherworldly grace, living in the world but not entirely part of it. So they're magical beings, but unlike the Santa's elves kind of elf, they are more Lord of the Rings style. So they're very slender and very graceful, and I always pictured them as tall as well, but it says here that they're slightly shorter than average humans, so ranging from well under 5 feet tall to just over 6 feet. So again, it's another race where I assumed that they were taller than humans, but they're shorter at best, or around the same height depending on how tall you are. And being slender, they generally weigh less than a human, but it depends on the human and the specific elf. Kind of like dwarves, males and females don't have that much physical distinction in this race. They, unlike dwarves, they are generally hairless, like they have no facial hair and very little hair on their bodies. It says that males and females are about the same height, and males are only marginally heavier than females. So yeah, it could be difficult to differentiate, and there's probably a few gender fluid elves out there, depending on how you want to play your characters. In terms of special traits for elves, you've got dark vision, which I feel like is very standard for pretty much all the races. Keen senses means you have proficiency in the perception skill. Fey ancestry means you have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put you to sleep. And trance, which is a very interesting one. Elves don't need to sleep. Instead, they meditate deeply, remaining semi-conscious for 4 hours of the day. The common word for such meditation is trance, which is why that's what it's called. Basically, during a long rest, an elf only really needs 4 hours of that, which is, I think, more the amount of time that other players would be having a short rest. So that's a great racial trait to have. If you had a party that was all elves, you could get things done probably a lot quicker. Because you would all only need 4 hours to trance in order to get what counts as a long rest. So the kind of benefit that they get from a trance is the same as a human would get for 8 hours of sleep. And then in terms of languages, you can speak, read, and write Common and Elvish. But that's kind of... I mean, it's one of the elf traits, but I think depending on how you're playing it, if you're saying that, like, this is an elf who grew up among orcs, for example, you'd probably be able to switch out Elvish for Orcish, because the languages you speak are usually based on who raised you. And this is obviously written under the assumption that you're raised among other elves. And if those elven traits weren't enough, you actually need to pick what type of elf you are. So there are Dark Elves, Eladrin, High Elves, Mark of Shadow Elves, and Wood Elves. My favorite is the Wood Elf, although the High Elf I think has some better traits among it. the first character I ever played was an elven druid, and part of the reason I had my elf be a high elf for that character was that you get to pick a cantrip from the wizard spell list, and so I think I picked Firebolt to be a cliche, but that's a good way to get to learn a wizard spell if you're not being a wizard. If you are being a wizard, then being able to pick a cantrip from the wizard spell list is kind of irrelevant because you're already a wizard. What else does High Elf have? Elf weapon training, proficiency with long sword, short bow, and longbow. Your intelligence score increases by 1 as a High Elf, and you get to learn an extra language in addition to the ones you already know. Now, a Wood Elf, they have very similar traits. For a Wood Elf, your wisdom score increases by 1. You have proficiency in the long sword, short bow, and longbow. But this one, you have fleet of foot. Your base walking speed increases to 35 feet. So the standard walking speed is 30 feet, so you can move a little bit faster. And then also Mask of the Wind. You can attempt to hide even when you are only lightly obscured by foliage, heavy rain, falling snow, mist, and other natural phenomena. So that's pretty cool. I think the character I'm drawing today would be more likely a wood elf than any other kind of elf, so I won't go too deeply into the other elves. I'm sure I'll draw them at another time. And yeah, that's some stuff about elves. Now what about wizards? Wizards are like the nerdy bookworms of the spellcasting classes, but they can also be rock stars depending on their spell. Well, all the spells are pretty damn cool, so it's kind of the Hermione of it all, where she seems to be such a nerd, like she's depicted as a nerd for being obsessed with school, but if the school is magic, that's pretty cool. So yeah, why wouldn't you be a nerd for magic? And that's what wizards are. They have a very, very strong connection with their spellbook. And it took me a little while to wrap my head around this because I've only ever played spellcasters that are like druids, where it's, you don't have to like sit and study and learn things. And I just hadn't really looked into wizard that thoroughly before. But the thing with the spellbook, it kind of reminds me of a witch and her grimoire, where they might come across a spell somewhere, but they have to take time studying it and reproducing, like trying to do the spell themselves and taking annotations on their own piece of paper or whatever. Like they have to copy it into their spell book after doing experimentation on someone else's spell to see if it works for them. It's not as simple as saying, oh, I have this other person's spell book and so now I have 2 spell books. You need to copy their spells into your spell book or do something similar like that before you can prepare spells for yourself from any other source of spells. Hopefully that makes sense. When I say prepare spells, that's just the spells that you can learn and memorize. You can change it each long rest, and especially if during the long rest, if you're an elf, you only need 4 hours to actually rest, and then the other 4 hours you can spend studying your spell book to prepare new spells for the next day, or however long. Sometimes you'll be without a long rest for days and days, depending on how your campaign goes. But the prepared spells, it's just another way of saying your memorized spells, the ones you don't need to look at your book when you're trying to cast that spell, the ones you have on hand. So if you lose your spell book, you only have access to the spells that you happen to have prepared that day. And when you're creating a new spell book, you can take some time to write down your prepared spells because you still remember them. All the other spells that were in your spell book are gone. You have to find them again. You have to learn them in whichever way you can. If you're lucky, you can go to a library or some sort of wizardry school and get quick access to them, but basically you don't want to lose your spellbook, and a lot of wizards choose to make backups of their spellbook for this reason. In the official guidebooks, it has mechanics of how to do that. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, and I create a backup. There is time components and cost components to each spell. So when you're replacing a spellbook, if it's a spell you've already learned, you only need 1 hour and 10 gold pieces for each level of each copied spell when you're putting that book together. When you're learning a brand new spell and you want to add it into your spell book, for each level of the spell, the process takes 2 hours and costs 50 gold pieces. The cost represents material components you expend as you experiment with the spell to master it, as well as the fine inks you use to record it. Once you've spent this time and money, you can prepare the spell just like any of your other spells. So the spell book, very important to a wizard. Very, very important. And one of the reasons that they love books is because it gives them access to a broader range of other spells that they can study and learn and put in their own spell book. Great. Now, I've been talking about the races and classes so long, I've been rambling on, that I haven't even talked about this particular elven wizard. I'm going to call her Felicity, Flick for short, and she is a student at wizarding school. She's just figuring out a new spell as we speak, possibly Firebolt, we'll see. And I think most of her abilities are based on the requirements to get into this school. So while you wouldn't expect a wizard to need to have +1 to strength, they probably had a requirement where you needed to demonstrate a skill in strength and dexterity and constitution, obviously intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So she probably was on like the volleyball team or something in her high school, something where she could demonstrate that she has the strength and dexterity and constitution to be on some sort of sporting team. Then of course, intelligence, that's the main thing that a wizard needs. So she would spend a lot of time in the library, and that is where she shines. That's her favorite place to be. Wisdom, she's young. She doesn't have a lot of wisdom yet, so she's just sort of average. And charisma, she's probably a very social young woman. Probably, especially if she's doing team sports and she's made it into her dream school, her dream university, that she's made a lot of friends and sharing her passion with people that have the same passion as her, people who relate to her and make her feel seen. She is just thriving. And what could ruin that other than some real world experience with a bunch of other characters who see her as just a nerd, maybe. And this is where the call to adventure could come in and make things a bit fun. There is nothing more satisfying than starting with a character whose life seems pretty perfect. The only thing she wants is adventure, and popping that bubble with the reality of, hey, you could die. You could actually die. Monsters are scary and you might die. That's a bit fun. That's some fun role play. And I feel like when people are starting out in D&D, they feel like, in terms of like, why do you want to go on an adventure, it usually defaults into like, my whole family is dead and I'm miserable and like the world is terrible and I just want to make, like, they're riding their own upward trajectory, rather than starting in a happy place and letting the roleplay of D&D make you fall and then rise and then fall and then rise. But yeah, this one, I think she's keen to go on an adventure. So I think the first invitation she gets to do something in the real world, I think she's thirsty for that, to get some hands-on experience. And yeah, this is our Flick, our Felicity. Thank you for watching. Please let me know if you liked this one. I did ramble on a lot at the beginning about the racing class, so sorry about that. But hopefully you liked it, and I'll catch you next week. Bye!